Wise men say only fools rush in.
There are secrets that don't just stay inside you, they become you. They wrap themselves around your spine and settle into the spaces between your ribs until you can no longer remember what it felt like to breathe without them. They change the way you answer the phone. They change the way you look at your children. They change the architecture of your entire existence until the person you were before the secret and the person you became after it feel like two strangers who happen to share the same name. Dr. Leonard Casey carried that kind of secret for 48 years. To the world, he was a decorated medical professional, a man who had spent 3 decades with the Shelby County Medical Examiner's Office in Memphis, Tennessee, and examining thousands of cases, testifying in courtrooms across the state, training younger examiners who went on to distinguished careers of their own. His colleagues described him as precise, methodical, and almost unnervingly composed, a man who believed the dead deserved the same rigor and respect as the living. By every professional measure, Leonard Casey was someone whose word carried genuine consequence. But there was another Leonard Casey, one that only he knew existed, one that sat alone in the dark hours of the night, replaying a single evening in August 1977, over and over again, until the memory had worn grooves into his mind, so deep he could trace them with his eyes closed. This was the Leonard Casey who declined every journalist's phone call for nearly 5 decades, at the one who turned away documentary filmmakers without explanation, the one who, in 2003, rejected a publisher's offer to write a memoir because he knew that any honest account of his life would eventually arrive at a door he could never open. His former colleagues noticed it over the years. The subject of Elvis Presley was the one topic that could visibly change the temperature of any room Leonard Casey entered. People learned, through trial and uncomfortable error, not to raise it in his presence. They assumed he was simply a private man who wanted distance from his proximity to fame. They had no idea what he was actually protecting. Then came December of last year, a diagnosis. The precise nature of it remained private at his request, but those closest to him confirmed what it meant, that there was now a deadline where none had existed before. A man of 81 years, facing the closing chapter of his life, looked at the secret he had carried since 1977 and made a calculation that only he could make. He could take it with him into silence, letting the truth dissolve into the same darkness that was coming for him, or he could set it down and let the world decide what to do with it. On the morning of February 17th, 2026, while most of America was still reaching for its first cup of coffee, Dr. Leonard Casey chose to set it down. What he said that morning took 11 words. It took 48 years to say them. His daughter spoke to an interviewer just hours after the statement became public. She was asked to describe what it had been like growing up with a father who carried something so enormous for so long. So she paused, and in that pause you could hear the weight of every unspoken conversation, every deflected question, every silence that had stretched across their family like a held breath that never fully released. Then she said something that stopped everyone who heard it. He was two people, the one we knew, and the one carrying something we were never allowed to see. What was he carrying? What could possibly be heavy enough to fracture a man into 2 separate versions of himself for nearly half a century? And why did it take the knowledge of his own mortality to finally make him speak? Because what Dr. Leonard Casey saw in that room at Graceland on August 16th, 1977, was not what the world was told, and for 48 years, he had been the only living person who could prove it. Now here is the question everyone asks when they hear a claim like this. How? How do you keep something this enormous quiet for nearly half a century? How do you convince every person who touched the lie to carry it with them to their graves? How do you build a wall of silence so complete that not a single crack appears across 48 years of relentless public fascination? The answer is not magic. The answer is not some impossible conspiracy involving thousands of people. The answer is infrastructure. The answer is that when you examine the ecosystem surrounding Elvis Presley in August of 1977, you find something that most people never bother to look at closely. You find a machine. And machines, when they are built correctly, do not require belief or loyalty or even agreement from the people inside them. Now, they only require compliance. And compliance, in certain worlds, is the easiest thing in the world to manufacture. Start with Colonel Tom Parker, the man who had controlled virtually every aspect of Elvis Presley's professional existence for over 2 decades. Parker was not simply a manager, he was an architect of isolation. He decided who got access. He decided what contracts were signed. He decided which opportunities were pursued and which were buried before they ever reached Elvis's ears. He was also a man with his own vulnerabilities, his own complicated legal history, and a financial stake in Elvis's legacy that extended far beyond any normal managerial relationship. When Elvis died, certain parties benefited in ways that were significant and documentable. Parker was among them. This does not prove anything, but it establishes something important. It establishes that the machinery existed. It establishes that the people with the power to orchestrate something of this magnitude were already in place, already embedded, already operating with the kind of autonomy that most people cannot even imagine. Then there was Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, a man whose grief at his son's funeral was visible to the entire watching world. He wept openly, devastatingly, in a way that seemed impossible to fabricate. And yet, Vernon Presley's relationship with the apparatus surrounding his son was more complicated than those headlines ever allowed. He was not a passive bystander in Elvis's life. He was involved in business decisions, financial arrangements, and the daily management of an empire that had grown far beyond any single person's ability to fully comprehend. When Dr. Casey's statement emerged, researchers began asking a question that had never quite been asked so directly before. Was Vernon's grief the grief of a father who had genuinely lost his child? Or was it the grief of a father who had lost his child in a different way, a more permanent way, a way that meant Elvis was still breathing somewhere in the world, but would never be his son again? And then there was the Memphis Mafia, the inner circle, the men who surrounded Elvis daily, who knew his habits, his fears, his secrets, his vulnerabilities. Loyalty in that world was absolute, but loyalty in certain circumstances becomes indistinguishable from complicity. When everyone around you is silent, so silence becomes the default. When everyone around you accepts the official story, questioning it becomes an act of betrayal. The Memphis Mafia did not need to be convinced of anything. They only needed to understand, without it ever being said aloud, that certain questions were not to be asked and certain doors were not to be opened. The autopsy report was sealed for 50 years. Legally permitted, yes, but unusual. The FBI file on Elvis Presley ran to hundreds of pages, and portions of it remained classified even on February 17, 2026. Why? What could possibly require protection after nearly 5 decades? These were questions that no one in authority ever insisted on answering. The machinery existed, the motive existed, the opportunity existed, and all that was missing was someone inside the machine willing to describe what it actually looked like from the inside. And on February 17th, 2026, that someone finally spoke. Dr. Casey didn't wake up one morning and decide to talk. He was pushed, not by journalists hunting for headlines, not by conspiracy theorists desperate for validation. He was pushed by documents he thought would never surface, by evidence that had been sleeping in forgotten boxes and sealed estates for decades, waiting for the exact right moment to crawl back into the light. The first document surfaced in late January. It was a handwritten inventory list from the Shelby County Medical Examiner's Office, dated August 17, 1977, the morning after Elvis Presley was declared dead. Standard procedure, the kind of bureaucratic paperwork that nobody ever reads twice. And except 2 independent researchers, working in different states and completely unknown to each other, noticed the same thing at precisely the same time. In the margin, written in ink that was clearly different from the rest of the document, were 2 letters, L.C., Leonard Casey's initials, and beside them, in the same different ink, two words that changed everything. Confirmed substitution. Those two words sat there on that page like a confession that had been hiding in plain sight for 48 years. The researchers who found it described the moment of recognition as feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath their chairs. Because if this was authentic, if this notation meant what it appeared to mean, then the entire official narrative of August 16, 1977 was not just questionable, it was fiction. 10 days later, now the second document emerged. This one came from the estate of a former Graceland employee who had died in 2019 and whose belongings had only recently been sorted through by distant relatives who had no idea what they were holding. It was a letter, never sent, addressed to no one in particular, written in the careful, deliberate language of someone trying to confess something without quite saying it out loud. The letter described events on the evening of August 16, 1977, that aligned with no official account. It mentioned a second vehicle that arrived at Graceland through a service entrance. It referenced a doctor whose name appeared in no public record of that night. And most significantly, it described a casket that had not come from any funeral home in Memphis, but from a private facility 40 miles outside the city limits. Well, when these documents reached Dr. Casey in early February, something shifted inside him. These were not rumors. These were not theories. These were pieces of physical evidence that corroborated what he had experienced, what he had seen, what he had been forced to participate in. For 48 years, he had been able to tell himself that his silence protected something larger than himself. But now the evidence was speaking without him. The truth was finding its way out through cracks he hadn't even known existed. When a journalist called him on February 12th, requesting comment on these documents, he did not hang up. He did not deny. He sat in his kitchen chair, looked out at the gray Tennessee winter, and said 5 words that would define what came next. Give me 5 days. The physical evidence had been troubling people since 1977. Multiple witnesses who had known Elvis intimately in life described seeing something in that open casket at Graceland that did not match their memories. The face was wrong somehow. The weight distribution was different. These observations had been dismissed across the decades as grief playing tricks on perception, as death transforming features in ways the living cannot anticipate. But they had never fully disappeared. They had remained there in the margins of history, unexplained and unexamined. And then there were the hands. In his eventual statement, Dr. Casey would write one line that carried more weight than entire paragraphs of explanation. Hands do not lie about life. These hands told a different story. And a medical examiner who had studied thousands of bodies across 3 decades had looked at the hands on that table and known with absolute certainty that they had not lived Elvis Presley's life. The documents had surfaced. The anomalies could no longer be explained away. And Dr. Leonard Casey, 81 years old and facing the end of his own timeline, made the decision that would define the final chapter of his life. He would tell the truth about that night in August 1977. All of it. The statement ran to 11 pages. It was precise, it was clinical, and it was devastating. Dr. Leonard Casey had written it in the measured language of a man who had spent a lifetime constructing official documents and understood exactly what words do and do not mean when they are committed to paper. There was no speculation, there was no theory, and there was only what he had seen, what he had been told, and what he had been forced to do on a night that the rest of the world thought they understood. It began not on August 16th, 1977, but 3 days earlier, August 13th. Casey received a communication through an intermediary he would describe only as a senior figure connected to the legal and entertainment infrastructure surrounding Elvis Presley. The message was not presented as a request. It was delivered as a set of instructions with the unmistakable weight of consequence behind them. A situation was developing. Certain individuals with significant influence over Elvis Presley's affairs had become aware that the entertainer had moved beyond the reach of conventional intervention. A decision had been made at levels Casey did not have access to. As something the intermediary called a controlled transition was underway. His cooperation would be required, his cooperation would be remembered, and the absence of his cooperation would be remembered equally. Casey wrote that he did not fully grasp what was being communicated until the evening of August 16th itself. When he arrived at Graceland that night, everything was wrong from the first moment. He was not directed to the main entrance that visitors knew. He was taken through a secondary door that most people never saw. He was met by two men he had never encountered before and whose names he was never given. They did not speak to him beyond what was absolutely necessary. They showed him to a room. They showed him a body, and they told him what his findings would need to say. The examination itself lasted less than an hour, but Casey described those minutes with the kind of precision that only comes from replaying a memory thousands of times across thousands of nights. The body on the table presented immediate inconsistencies. The weight distribution did not match the medical records available to him. Physical markers that should have been present, given Elvis Presley's documented pharmaceutical history across the preceding years, were entirely absent. The hands were wrong. That was how he wrote it in his statement. Not different. Wrong. These were hands that had not gripped thousands of microphones, had not played thousands of hours of guitar, had not lived the specific physical life that Elvis Presley's hands had lived. He knew it the way a mother knows her child's cry in a room full of babies, and he knew it with the kind of certainty that does not require explanation. He signed what they told him to sign. He completed the documentation they required. He went home to his family, and then he did not sleep for 4 days. Could not sleep, did not, as if his body understood that closing his eyes would mean accepting what had happened. And acceptance was still, in those first horrible days, impossible. The aftermath of Casey's February 17th statement was immediate and explosive, but perhaps the most telling response came from Graceland itself. Elvis Presley Enterprises issued a statement that afternoon that every journalist who read it found deeply unsettling. It was not a denial. It was not a confirmation. It acknowledged Casey's claims with something that felt closer to recognition than rejection. They expressed respect for the complexity of public feeling surrounding Elvis's legacy. They remained committed to honoring the truth of Elvis's life and the integrity of his memory. Not one word directly refuting what Casey had said. It was the kind of statement that lawyers write when they know something larger is coming and they need room to maneuver when it arrives. Casey gave no interviews after his written statement was released. He answered a small number of follow-up questions through the investigative outlet that had published his account, and then he returned to his home, to his kitchen chair, to his view of the Memphis winter. His daughter, asked how her father seemed after finally unburdening himself, thought for a long moment before answering. "Lighter," she said. "He seems lighter than I have ever seen him." South the burden released, Dr. Leonard Casey's final confession. In that modest kitchen in Memphis, as darkness fell on the evening of February 17th and the last traces of winter daylight faded from the windows, Dr. Leonard Casey had finally done what he came to do. After decades of deliberation, after countless sleepless nights wrestling with his conscience, after years of watching the official narrative calcify into accepted history while he alone carried the weight of what actually happened, he had spoken his truth into a recording device held by a journalist he barely knew but had come to trust. He had carried his impossible secret for longer than some people live their entire lives. 46 years of silence. 46 years of watching documentaries that got it wrong, reading biographies that missed the crucial details, and listening to conspiracy theories that stumbled around the edges of truth without ever quite reaching it. 46 years of attending medical conferences where colleagues discussed Elvis Presley's death as a straightforward case of polypharmacy and cardiac arrhythmia, nodding along while screaming internally at the incomplete picture they were painting. The weight of that secret had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with the passage of time. It had carved lines into his face that stress and sleeplessness had deepened. It had haunted his dreams and troubled his waking hours. It had created a barrier between himself and every close relationship, because true intimacy requires honesty, and he was living with a lie of omission that touched the most significant moment of his professional life. But now, finally, he had set it down. As the burden that had bent his shoulders and troubled his sleep for nearly half a century had been transferred from his sole possession into the public domain, he had spoken the names, described the circumstances, detailed the medical evidence that contradicted the official autopsy findings, and explained why the truth had been suppressed by people with power, money, and motivation to protect a particular version of events. Whatever came next, the lawsuits, the attacks on his credibility, the attempts to discredit his testimony, the media circus, the death threats from those who preferred the comfortable lie to the disturbing truth, was no longer his burden alone to carry. He had done his part. He had fulfilled the obligation he felt to Elvis Presley's memory, to historical accuracy, to his own conscience, and to the millions of fans who deserved to know what really happened to the man they loved. The truth was out there now, released from the locked vault of his memory and floating free in the world. It would find its way through social media and news reports, through YouTube videos and podcast discussions, into every corner of the internet where people still wondered, still questioned, still refused to accept the sanitized official story of what really happened to Elvis Presley on that August night in 1977. Dr. Casey sat in his kitchen as full darkness settled over Memphis, feeling lighter than he had in decades. The recorder had been turned off, the journalist had left, the house was quiet except for the familiar creaking of old wood settling and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. He had said what needed saying. Now he had provided dates, names, medical details, and contextual evidence that would allow investigators to verify his account independently. He had explained not just what happened, but why it had been covered up, the financial interests that would have been threatened by the truth, the reputations that would have been destroyed, the criminal prosecutions that would have followed if the full story had emerged in 1977, when memories were fresh and evidence was still available. He had connected dots that historians had been staring at for decades without seeing the pattern, and in the end, simply speaking the truth aloud, transferring it from the prison of his own mind into the permanent record of history, was enough. Dr. Leonard Casey didn't need vindication or recognition. Yet he didn't need his version of events to be universally accepted or his credibility to remain unquestioned. He simply needed to stop carrying the secret alone to ensure that when he died, which given his age and declining health would not be many years away, the truth wouldn't die with him. He had fulfilled that obligation. The rest was up to others, journalists to investigate, lawyers to pursue justice, fans to demand accountability, and history to ultimately render its verdict on what really happened and who was responsible. His part in the story was complete.